This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
We hope that this episode of Real Talk is going to give you exactly what you need today. And I think that there's going to be a little bit of everything in this show coming up. Our Real Talk Roundtable. This show is being recorded on a Friday, which means we'll present to you, per our tradition, a roundtable or panel conversation with interesting people doing interesting and impactful things. If this is the first episode of Real Talk you're tuning in for a while, I want to establish some quick context. The previous episode to this, which would have been our June 6th episode, a tough one, toughest show I've ever hosted, shared with you about the sudden passing of my friend Laws. And we talked to Jeremy Allen, who's a grief educator. Just a fascinating guy, Johnny. The feedback that we received from Real Talkers, both during and after that episode about what Jeremy brought to the table was just amazing. I've pulled a bunch of emails that we're going to get to at some point today, like before we wrap today's episode in the back half. And this is just a selection from, our inbox has been flooded, which is both encouraging and tragic that so many of you can relate to loss through suicide. And but it's reiterated to us the importance of talking about all of this. But that's also really heavy lifting, right? Real talk, that's tough. I don't have any tears left after receiving, this horrific news 4 days ago. My co-pilot here on this show, Johnny Infamous, I've never appreciated you more. And it was amazing what you brought to the table yesterday. Yeah. I thought I'll just let people know if they didn't listen to our June 6th podcast, if you didn't listen to the podcast about grief, I don't mean to make you self-conscious or bashful because you deflect praise wherever possible, but right around the 55-minute mark, after we talked to Jeremy, you just basically kind of take it away and share, and you free-flowed how you were feeling.
Sure.
And I listened to it when I got home. I listened to the show again, and I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you.
And I want to let Real Talkers know how much I appreciate everything that they've poured into these emails. So we're going to take some time today. And I know on Monday as well, when we check in with Charles Adler, presented by Tice Automotive Consulting, that Adler's going to have something to say on this as well. But this is kind of where our men's mental health discussions began, not since the show's inception. We've touched on it from time to time, and through the 3.5 years we've been doing shows. I still can't believe that. But it was the passing of Grayson Murray, the PGA golfer, when you and Charles and I started talking. It was unplanned. It was spontaneous on the show. We ended up talking for 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. A week later, tragedy strikes in our family and in our circle of friends. And so it's really reiterated to us the importance of talking about this. So we're gonna walk that walk and get to some of your emails, plus the Flamethrower coming at you today, presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton at Sherwood Park. And this is it's almost exclusive. It's an exclusively political edition of the Flamethrower. But we're going back to about a week ago, our group chat roundtable, when Sarah Hamilton, Jenny Adams, and Catherine O'Neill joined me, and we talked about cell phones in schools. We talked about Donald Trump, and we talked about Pierre Poilievre. I had just interviewed Andrew Lawton, who is the author of that new book about Pierre Poilievre, His Political Life, or whatever it's called. And Andrew came on. Andrew's obviously a conservative commentator, so he kind of had his take on that. But it lit a fire under a whole bunch of you. So Debra and Ray and Ed and Jim and Vernon, BC, and Jennifer, we're all going to get to your emails. Love those in the Flamethrower. It's going to be a rowdy edition today. Yeah. This episode of Real Talk is happening with the support of Alberta's top real estate school, and that's Rello. If you check them out online at rello.ca, you can learn a little bit more about the Rello advantage and why people are starting their real estate careers with this team. It starts with the fact that they've got experienced experts that are available to provide you with advice, counsel, to help you get ready for writing that real estate exam. It turns out that exam is maybe easier to fail than you might think, so you're going to want to have the experience that Rello brings to the table. They've got winning webinar and tutorial content. They've got a ton of exclusive business building insights, which means that once you've written your exam, once you're licensed to practice real estate in the province of Alberta, you're also then going to have the tools you need to start making money. That's typically what people are looking to do when they start new careers. Learn more about what Rello brings to the table on their website. And don't forget that promo code Ryan100. It's going to knock $100 off their Alberta residential and their Alberta commercial real estate bundles. That's Ryan100, all one word, when you get started at Rello.ca. We are going to dedicate a special episode of Real Talk to phones in schools. Before we get to our Real Talk Roundtable, you're going to meet 3 movers and shakers in podcasting and on climate, by the way. And I'm talking climate action. That's coming up in just a couple of minutes here on the show. But June 11th, coming up, circle your calendars, a special edition of Real Talk. We've lined up 3 different expert voices that come at the issue of phones in schools, tech, and young people from 3 different perspectives. But pretty interesting to see, and we are hearing rumblings, and I think that this is a scoop on Real Talk. I do think it's a scoop. Okay. But we can expect the province of Alberta to be joining Ontario and Quebec shortly in taking action province-wide on implementing province-wide policies relating to distractions in classrooms. Ontario's kind of been at least making the claim, and I guess they've got proof of performance. Ontario kind of leading the nation right now with policy on phones in schools. They rolled this out end of April, so like approximately a month ago or so, and they did it based on grade, right? So students from K to 6 are required to keep their phones on silent and out of sight for the entire school day, unless their teacher says it's okay. I want to acknowledge, I know some people are going to be going, hang on, did you just say kids in kindergarten have to put their phones on silent? But I do think that there are some kids in kindergarten that might have phones with them at school.
That's crazy.
For sure, grades, 2, 3, 4. I asked our little guy, he's in grade 3. I said, are there kids that have phones? And of course, he's smart and he's campaigning for his own, which is he's not going to get. Good luck. But when I asked him, I said, are there kids in your class that have their own phones? He's like, yeah.
Everyone, Dad.
Obviously. Yeah. And I go, okay, who? And he was able to name one.
Yeah.
And then I know this little guy because I know his parents, the one that he named. And I said, I don't think he has a phone. And he goes, well, it's like it turns out that the little guy has an iPod. I was like, that's not a phone.
Okay.
Very big difference. But once you start getting into 4, 5, 6, grade 7 for sure, I think it's far more common for young people to have phones. In Ontario, from grades 7 to 12, cell phones not permitted during class time unless explicitly directed by the educator, by the teacher, so they can check their phones on recess and lunch and what have you.
Yeah.
But we'll get into this on Tuesday. But the word is that the province of Alberta is going to step up here and do something about it. The education minister, Nicolaitis, had looked into, I think it was 16 different jurisdictions. So they picked, I don't know if it was random or how they did it, but they looked at 16 different basically schools or school districts in the province of Alberta, and they found that more than half of them had no policy whatsoever, like zero policy on phones. And obviously this is something that I think that some parents were getting pretty concerned about, and maybe even more than the parents, because they're seeing it all the time, is the teachers. I think a lot of teachers were calling out for action on this. So coming up on June 11th, one of our guests, it's going to be 3 different guests. We want 3 different perspectives. One of them is going to be a teacher, a junior high school teacher in the province of Alberta that's looking for policy on this. She also happens to be a Real Talker, for those of you that know Jillian. So Jillian's going to return to Real Talk. Cool. And I think I also gave that spoiler alert earlier, but we will be bringing back 14-year-old storytelling phenom Wyatt Sharp.
Oh, I love Wyatt.
Host of the Wyatt Sharp Show. And he's going to join us. Wyatt's a junior high. I think he's grade 8 or 9. He must be grade 9 probably in Ontario. And so they've got the policy in place. So Wyatt's going to talk to us about how that's impacted them. He's a bit of a unique case.
Guaranteed he has a phone.
I mean, he just interviewed Mehdi Hassan.
Yeah.
The interview before that, he interviewed Lisa Laflamme.
Yeah.
He interviewed the former Prime Minister of Israel. I saw that he just put that up on you can check out his YouTube channel, The Wyatt Sharp Show. Yeah. So he's just kicking ass, obviously, and doing an amazing job. I mean, imagine the contacts.
I was just going to say, his
cellular
text messages
are probably
Rolodex is probably...
It's like Katie Couric. And
stacks up to ours.
Yeah. Don Lemon. He has interviewed Don Lemon, actually, so he probably does have Don in his phone. But so that'll be an interesting conversation. If you have a take on that, we'd always love to hear from you as well. Of course, talk@ryanjesperson.com is where you can send us your thoughts on phones, on schools, or whatever else is catching your attention these days. We always love getting suggestions from Real Talkers that say, have you thought about talking about this? Have you thought about talking about that? I'm just looking at an email right now. You know what? I'm going to reach down here because people deserve credit. People deserve shouts out when they take the time to send us big, long notes, don't they? Like I wanted to note Chris, who wrote into us, and he talked about what's making him feel extremely heavy and discouraged. And he says, I need you to talk about the reorg of health services, of AHS in particular, of clear cutting and coal mining. And then he just like kind of develops his thoughts and pitches this great roundtable. So I just sometimes, like when we get literally hundreds of emails a week, and I know that that's, whatever it is, what it is, but like we try, and if you email the show, we try to respond to you. Even if it just says, hey, thanks for your note, we're on it, or hey, thanks for your note, we appreciate you being a friend of the show. But some of these, I know that it takes half an hour to put together an email like Chris did with all of the research and the background information. He basically makes our job easy. But we love when we can give all of you a shout out on the show and let you know that we appreciate you. You know who might be just as or even more impressive than 14-year-old Wyatt Sharp is one of our next guests right now, John. And it's a real pleasure to welcome these three to the show to form our Real Talk Roundtable today. They are three of the people behind a new podcast that's catching folks' attention called Climate Action Figures. And I love this. It's got the comic branding. It looks like it was drawn up by like Stan Lee and his team, their logo. But it's got that big recycle logo in it. And this is a place, a podcast, a resource to hear from young people who are sharing steps that they're taking to mitigate climate change. The star of episode 11 is one of those that's joining us today on the show. It's Aryan Sharma, who's a grade 8 student from my hometown of Calgary, Alberta. Aryan's going to talk to us about how he's tackling the microplastic pollution crisis. That is so obviously a real problem for us today. We're going to ask Aryan about his microplastic collector in just a second. But welcome to the show, my man. You're making your Real Talk debut today. It's nice to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. You're joined by Kayla McIntosh, who's the creative consultant on this pod. Kayla mixes her passion for climate change with her love for content creation. That includes podcasts, creative direction, and, of course, the art of storytelling. You can also probably find Kayla working on promoting healthy eating and active living through her work and engrossed in many different creative hobbies. So basically, Kayla, you're going to talk to us today about how we can be better and how we can save the planet. Welcome to the show. It's nice to see you.
Having me. Great to see you too.
Yeah, you bet. And John Whiddon is anchoring this panel today with us. John, a public school teacher for many years, who now works with what most people will know as CPAWS, the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. John develops and delivers programs all across the southern part of the province. And his latest venture is this podcast called Climate Action Figures. John, it's great to see you back on the show. How did this podcast get started? Like, where did you come up with the idea for this?
It's great to be back. Thanks for having us. But Ryan, before we start, I have to say that show yesterday was sublime, so moving and helpful, I'm sure, for many, and lives up to your title, Real. And so just thanks to you and Johnny for doing that and still being here today. I feel like we should just sit around and talk, and you should lie down and have a nap or something.
Yeah, I appreciate you opening the door for me to touch on it. It was a difficult show, of course, and I think both Johnny and I, if I can speak for you, are totally emotionally exhausted. I'm crushed. I don't have any tears left. But I will say this, is that we booked the three of you with intent today because, quite frankly, we needed to do a show where we were encouraged, and we needed to do a show where we heard about something positive and people that are making a real difference in their community. So I appreciate you recognizing yesterday's show, and I appreciate in advance what you're bringing to today's.
Well, I'm sure you're going to get some hope through what you're going to hear today. And in answer to your question, Ryan, it started with basically when I was teaching, I was noticing some of my students were showing signs of anxiety around the climate. So I eventually started to do some research around that and developed an in-school program that would help students to deal with climate anxiety, which is a thing. Studies prove it over and over again. So that led to some people asking me, how can we share? At the end of this program is students doing a small project that helps to mitigate climate change. So someone asked, how are you going to share all these great things these kids are doing? So I thought about that, and podcast came to mind. And so that's how the podcast developed from that program.
So, Aryan, you're like the perfect guest for this show, right? You're this young person, relatively speaking, mid-teens, and yet your understanding of some of the environmental issues that we're looking at, I'm talking humanity, as well as potential solutions, after listening to the episode 11 that you appear on, after seeing what you're doing relating to microplastics, it seems to me like your understanding of this and your action on this is from what we might expect from somebody in their 30s or 40s. Talk to me about where your awareness comes from, your motivation, what drives you. You're a fascinating study, my man.
Definitely. So it all really started when I was young. Me and my parents, we used to always go outside. I was always really connected with nature, and I was really passionate for environmental stewardship. So when I saw that microplastics, plastics, and a lot of different things in general were hurting our environment, hurting marine animals, hurting land animals, it really spiked something in my heart. What can I do of my love of many different things, and how can I use those things to solve these issues? So it really comes down from what have I experienced to help the world.
So how did microplastics in particular get on your radar?
Yeah, so I live across a lot of ponds and lakes, a lot of water bodies. And so what I noticed was plastic dumping was really prevalent in these water bodies. And what happens to plastics after some time is they don't break down or decompose. Instead, they just turn into smaller pieces known as microplastics. And when I saw these plastics in the water bodies, I noticeably also saw a slight decline in the animals that used to live across these ponds and lakes, which could have been the reason. And these animals could have been eating these plastics and mistaking them for food or something. So that's really where I got it, like right close to my home. Microplastics are already coming through in areas like that.
So you've developed the MicroGuard microplastic collector, and I'm going to put this link into our show notes here so our audience members can check this out. This is fascinating. This is a submission that you just made to the the National Science Fair, correct?
Yes.
This is like the biggest stage there is, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So tell us about this innovation. Tell us about your invention. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I really love robotics, and from the past year, I started creating a robot to detect and collect microplastics underwater. So I had a lot of goals for this robot to start off, like, for example, autonomous control or differentiating between organic matter and microplastics. So my invention essentially uses the process of UV ultraviolet light to detect these microplastics. And what happens is these ultraviolet light particles essentially excite the plastic polymer chains, which leads to a longer wavelength being emitted back to the robot. And I detect this wavelength emission using something called a photodetector, which detects light intensity differences. And so what I've done here is that what this actually does is it can detect the difference between organic matter as well, because organic matter doesn't have these types of qualities. And so when these microplastics are detected, I use a filter that collects it and takes it out of the environment indefinitely.
So this is something that basically, like, if I'm going to put this into layperson's terms so I can wrap my mind around it, this is something, an invention that ultimately would be scaled up to sweep the ocean floor, or to ultimately, best case scenario, clean the ocean of microplastics by detecting the difference between plastic and organic matter. It's not going to be sweeping up plankton. It's not going to be causing a food crisis for the world's ocean population, but it is going to be recognizing and collecting up microplastics.
Definitely. In the future, when I can, get even more access to lab materials, when I can do even more rigorous tests, I really hope I can scale this up and start to clean up the oceans.
What stands in the way of that for you? Is it just to be direct? Is it your age?
Well, I don't think age is too big of a problem. I mean, I've gone this far with my age, so I don't see what's stopping me with going even further. Definitely one small thing is that Calgary isn't close to any oceans, but in the future, I've already tested, in ocean-related environments, but in the future, I really hope if I can scale it up, then I can put it in the oceans.
I think I have contacts for you. My cousin did her microbiology BSc at a university in Hawaii. That's one of the smartest moves I've ever heard anybody make. So, so I guess what I mean by your age, and I don't mean that in a condescending way at all, but I just mean like what resources do you have in your high school? What resources do you have available to you when it comes to funding or when it comes to investors or things like that? Obviously, you're on a remarkable path. I suppose for you, it's just a matter of developing the technology, and right around the time it sounds to me like that could be integrated into practice. That's right around the time you're going to be approaching adulthood. This could be everything's coming up, Arian, for you.
Yeah, definitely. And especially in like even despite my age, I actually got the money for this project to help me and like really create and test all these different types of sensors with something called the Jack Leslie Youth Environment Grant. So I applied for it, and it's a grant based in Calgary, and I got $500 for my project to really help create it. So there isn't anything really stopping, youth from creating all these projects. I believe, anybody can do this if they put their mind to it.
Oh, I love it. I love how you're going to be inspiring people through this and through your work. Kayla, are you essentially like, are you producing the podcast? Like, are you working to like suss out and find these stories, young people and like Arian that we're hearing from? How do you apply your passion for storytelling and creativity into what we're talking about today?
Actually, no, I would say that John does almost all of the podcast producing. He is basically the podcast. I just help where I can here and there. Sometimes it's usually to give that youth perspective. So sometimes I help John with the social media aspects of the podcast, and also just having a bit of a sounding board and the two of us talking about what direction we want to take it in and how we want to really appeal to the youth of today.
Well, people can hear more about you and John talking about it in episode 5 of Climate Action Figures. For you, I mean, like what I love about this roundtable, and apologies, John, you and I are of the same vintage. Like we're experienced at life, let's say that, but we do have 3 kind of different age groups represented here, which may, like generationally speaking, and I'm painting Kayla with a huge broad brush here, but generationally speaking, maybe 3 different perceptions of the state the world is in, or 3 different perceptions of the role that humankind needs to take in that. What was your understanding, like growing up, making your way through high school, like coming to an understanding of the state of the climate, the state of the planet? Like I guess what really made an impression on you in those formative young years?
For me, what I've really noticed, especially through this podcast, is just how society at large and those really big trends are occurring. Because for, let's say, my parents' generation or earlier, it really wasn't too much of a conversation at all among people, and there wasn't a lot of awareness. And then for me, I think that's when it started to gain more traction. And I attribute a lot of that passion to my parents, because they definitely raised me with that, and helped foster that passion and love within me and my sister as well. So I saw it being talked a little bit more amongst my peers when I was young, growing up through junior high and high school, but I was definitely a bit of an outlier. People kind of gave me funny looks a little bit when I got really mad at people for littering or wanted to talk a lot about it. But through this podcast, I've seen that now in high schools and in junior highs, it's even more common and more of an interest for the broader group of youth, which is really inspiring, and it's really lovely to see. So that is one thing that I've really taken note of throughout this process of being on the podcast and helping out with it.
John, how important is it to like, why a podcast? I'm curious to know, I'm talking specifically about the platform, and like, who's your target audience? Who are you trying to reach here?
Well, interesting question, Ryan, because we started out thinking the interviews would be youth, which we kind of classified as somewhere between 8 and 30 years old. And that would probably be our audience as well. But the audience is much broader than that. I got a lot of feedback from older audience members who are really saying they're given hope by the stories of young people like Arian or Kayla, who are doing cool things to help the environment. So it's a bigger range than we thought.
And yeah, I mean, that's it's fascinating to see, because everyone's going to have different understandings of some of these issues. Like Aaron, we hear a lot about climate anxiety But I don't oftentimes get a chance to talk to someone like you who's like, I'm asking you now about you and your peers. I'm obviously you're familiar with the concept or what it is. Do you see it? Is that a thing in your peer group, in your school?
Yeah, definitely. So, well, climate anxiety, of course, it's a really pressing issue, and I have a lot of it seeing the problems. And climate change, it's not something people like just don't know about. I'm pretty sure almost everybody knows about climate change, but the effects are not starting to come to us. And I believe one thing that isn't so great what's happening is that people will only react when the effects get to them themselves. So right now in like my friend group, climate anxiety, it isn't really there. But I believe that educating everybody, like doing seminars, things like that, it's really important because if we wait until the problem gets too bad and it's irreversible, then it would be too late. It won't work out well at that point.
Kayla, do you see it like it's always rude. I always feel rude when I'm asking people how old they are. Are you in your 20s? Am I
Yeah.
like ish in that neighborhood?
Yes.
What are you, by the way? Are you Gen Z or are you millennial?
Oh,
Do you know?
I think I'm Gen Z. I might be like the very start. I'm 24.
Oh, can I just say
So
how much I love that you don't know which one you are?
I don't.
No, I'm serious. Like, I just love that you don't know what you are because I think it would be so much better if fewer people knew. According to this, just because I think that we're like millennials think this, but Gen Z thinks this. And I'm like, well, I don't know if it's that simple. But apparently age 24, they say from 12 to 27. If you're from 12 to 27 years old, so you and Arian are together. You guys are Gen Z. John, I'm pretty sure you and I are both Gen X.
I'm a millennial.
Johnny, you are a millennial.
So we do have we've got Gen X, millennials, Gen Z.
Yeah.
So
we've got a boomer in the chat here, and that's not a diss.
Okay, boomer.
I'm just saying because I saw Lauren chime in and he said if John and Jespo are aged experienced, I'm Yoda. So I'm assuming that Lauren is a boomer, and I say that with love and respect. But okay, so you're technically you're Gen Z, Kayla. But when it comes to that climate anxiety, now this we can go deep on this conversation because you can talk about, is it even a thing? Should it be a thing? What's prompting it? How do you deal with it? Are some people stoking the fires of climate anxiety for their own selfish purposes? Do adults potentially need to feel more climate anxiety? I mean, I guess depending on who you talk to, you can come at this from 100 different angles. But how does it apply to you, to your peer group, to your circle? Would you use different phrasing? Do you see it? Is it a thing?
Yeah, I would definitely say that it does affect some people in my age group. Of course, I can't speak for everyone, but personally, from my experience, it has affected me. Luckily, not to a debilitating state. But yeah, I definitely feel anxious and stressed about the future and the potential for where the climate could go. And I feel like a couple years ago, specifically, I was getting more and more stressed out about it and feeling more and more like doomsday was coming and that there wasn't a lot of hope. So it would be a bit of a cycle where I would want to know about what's going on with climate change and I would want to feel like I'm aware. And then I would get anxious about it and feel a little bit down about the state of the world and feeling like it's a little hopeless. And then I would say I need a break from climate news. And then I would go for a little while without hearing or learning anything new. And then I would start again thinking, I should know more about it. I shouldn't just ignore just because I'm stressed out about it. It's important to keep aware and to keep fighting and to keep having hope. So when John came to me with the idea of this podcast, I thought that was a great idea because it's a way to keep aware and up to date and keep that issue in your mind without always feeling so hopeless about it. And it gives people hope, and that's the point. And I think that is I hope it helps a lot of people who listen to it to mitigate that stress and that anxiety, because I do think it is a thing and it affects a lot of people.
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
Could I jump in with a question here?
I was hoping you would.
Oh, good. I've asked several guests on the podcast this question, but it occurred to me today that I have not asked these two, and I would love to hear their answer. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being no problem whatsoever, and 10 being I'm losing sleep every night about it, where are you on the scale of concern about the environment right now?
Arian first?
Sure, definitely. Well, right now, I believe that I would say like a 7 or an 8. Why? It's because there is a definitely climate change is definitely a problem. But what there also is a lot of people wanting to help the world and a lot of people making all these inventions and new discoveries on how to help really reverse the damages because we are still in the state of the earth where we can still do something about it. So it really gives me hope that even young people are doing something because they are the next generation. So if we already know that so many people are taking action, then I believe that our earth is in good hands because humans can really do anything they put their mind to.
For people watching on YouTube, you know that like Johnny is showing the most devastating footage possible.
I'm the doom and gloom guy.
Arian's like, we can save this place, and all I'm seeing is like floods,
We're
and
fucked.
Wildfires, and plastic.
Kayla's answer is going higher and
on
higher.
the beach. Kayla was at a 5, now she's at a 10. Kayla, where are you? 1 to 10.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. Now I'm gonna have nightmares about those.
My bad.
beaches.
My bad.
Blame Infamous.
Yeah, I would say I'm sitting at a comfortable 6.5 or 7. It probably would have been higher if you would have asked me maybe like a year ago, but I've made an intentional practice of trying to seek out more helpful and hopeful news to, I don't know, make myself feel a little bit better about it. And it has been helping, and I've been a little less stressed about it lately.
Okay, so 6.5, 7. Johnny, what are you, Infamous? What are you at?
Oh, I'm the doom and gloom guy over here.
What, are you like a 10?
Yeah, no, I mean, well, my partner Jatinder is very worried, so I feel like I hear about it a lot more than I'm comfortable with. So sometimes I say to her like, "Hey, tomorrow we're not going to talk about the droughts over here, the fires over here, and everything, because it's happening everywhere, right? It's crazy what's going on." And then she's the one who always sends me, the TikToks or the reels of just what's going on in India or here and there with plastic, like some of the stuff we were just showing. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say on a day where my wife is chatting to me about it, yeah, I'm up there. I'm at like a 7 or an 8. It's pretty doom and gloom for me, but I'm scared for the younger generation because I know the worst of it isn't going to be while we're here. It's going to be right after we're gone. It's going to be 50 years from now. That's when it's going to get really bad.
Yeah. So John, then this is where I roll in, and now you and I will give our answers. And I fear that, here's my thing is like 10 to me, like 10 is like, as I mean, like you said, losing sleep, I'm trying not to like invoke examples here to make light of things people experience when they feel anxiety, but like you're talking like full blown anxiety is a 10, and like 1 is like throwing plastic wrappers out the window of your car and like flicking your cigarette butts
People
into the
still do
ocean
that?
and like upset at that and say that I need to take this more seriously because don't I see like the wildfires in BC and we're setting temperature records and that's all 100% true, but keep in mind the context of your question, John, is like in resting state, where are we with our anxiety? And if I were to say to you that I'm like an 8 out of 10 on anxiety around that would just be straight up lying. Like actually how it impacts my day to day, I'm probably like closer to like a 3 than a 4. But that doesn't mean that I don't care. Do you know what I mean? It just means that I'm not like losing sleep over it every single night. There's bigger things to worry about. Maybe not. Maybe let me take that back. There are more immediate things competing for my thoughts and anxious moments than like the future of planet Earth in 100 years. Am I part of the problem?
Maybe we are the older generation. I don't know, but I'll tell you something that I found for sure is the older people are, the lower their number is, it seems. And so when we have 13-year-olds who are 7 or 8. I think can you imagine living with that? I mean, what was I doing when I was 13? I sure wasn't making plastic trolling, microplastic machines, that's for sure. But I also wasn't worried about anything. I mean, we had the nuclear thing going on when I was about that age, but even that wasn't keeping me awake at night. So that's the whole point of this podcast, is to give young people some hope that there are people out there, as Arian says, doing things that are amazing, that are inspiring, that can solve some of these problems. And for example, this Tuesday, the newest episode of the podcast, if I could plug it.
Yeah, do it.
Is featuring a really interesting conversation with a big social media star from New York named Jacob Simon. And Kayla was just saying she likes to look at some of the positive stuff. Well, this came onto my radar because of Kayla, actually. And I was looking around and found this Jacob Simon. He does a 1-minute post on social media every day that's good news stories about the environment. That's it. He walks around New York and videos himself, and it's huge. He's got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers. So these kind of stories of hope, I think, are important. And maybe as we're older and we're more resilient, we get a bit more wisdom, hopefully, right, Ryan?
Mm-hmm.
We can see that there is some hope there, whereas some of the younger people out there today, I'm wondering if they're seeing that hope, and I don't want them to be desperate about the condition of the planet. But it's serious, but things are happening.
Okay, so here's our assignment is before we wrap this, I do want to remind everybody, first of all, that you can find climate action figures wherever you download your podcasts. I'm looking at it on Apple Podcasts, but you can find it on Spotify or anywhere else. Actually, this is a good time for me to mention this, John. You and I will have a mutual interest in this. Did you hear what's happening? Google Podcasts, after June 23rd, they're shutting it down. So anybody that's been getting climate action figures or Real Talk or any other podcast on Google Podcasts, make sure you migrate over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else by June 23rd. But make sure you sign up there, and also do these guys a solid and make sure that you rate and review the podcast when you find it. That's huge for the algorithm. It really helps make sure that stories like Arian's and stories like what we're hearing from Kayla and John as well get told. So here's your assignment from us. Before we wrap here, I would love to hear from each of you an anecdote or a brief story or an example of something outside of what you're doing, something you've seen or heard about, maybe, John, from an upcoming episode or even one that you've spoken to in past, that is bringing you hope. That's sort of like, quelling that anxiety, so to speak. That's reminding you that this is not all doom and gloom. Arian, outside of what you're doing to save the planet, which is awesome, by the way, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention congratulations on your Jack Leslie Youth Environmental Grant win. That's a big deal, and you deserve kudos for that. What's something that's really inspiring or encouraging you outside of your work in the context of what we're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that really inspires me, is something back at home, actually. So my home in India, a lot of my relatives, they really enjoy the environment, and they are always really caring for what they do and maintaining a lot of things like picking up trash and things like that. But what inspires me from that is that even in countries where poverty is very stricken, people can still find and do something to help, and you don't have to be limited with all these resources, and you can really do anything that you want to. So it really inspires me that where I should be grateful where I am, but I should also be putting a lot of environmental stewardship with the resources I have.
John, how much were you joking and how much were you serious? I don't know if Arian knows this, but when you emailed me previously and you referred to him as the future Prime Minister of Canada, how serious, John, were you about that?
I was serious in that I think this guy can do whatever he chooses in life. So that's up to Arian. You'll have to ask him if he's going to be Prime Minister.
Well, I just wanted to know how serious you were about teeing that up before I ask Arian to step up to the tee box here. But is that something like when you look at your future career, obviously it strikes me that there's great promise and a bright present and future in innovation. What about on policy? Could you see yourself pursuing a career in elected office?
Well, I mean, I love anything really. I actually really do like public speaking. I
Yeah,
do
no
debate.
kidding.
I do lots of debate and speech. I went to a bunch of those competitions because I really like talking about different topics in the world, especially in debate, because in debate you just get a topic out of nowhere. You have to prepare 15 minutes what you're going to say about it. So it kind of actually prepares me to speak in many different things. And even in the class, especially, I'm definitely a leader and I can really speak up for the class. So becoming a prime minister is definitely on the list.
I love that. Well, make your first 10 million first, and then you don't have to grind it out in politics for the paycheck, and then you'll be much more electable as well. But no, in all seriousness, Arian, that's amazing. Kayla, what's something that's brought you like inspiration, peace of mind, that encourages you in the context of climate?
So there's a lot of things because like John mentioned, I like to follow a lot of social media accounts that post a lot of really good news and cool inventions that people are doing. But something a little bit closer to home, maybe 2 weeks ago, I decided to participate in my local neighborhood community cleanup. And I had invited a couple people to come with me, some friends and family, but they all happened to be busy that day. So I just went by myself. And I was really hoping that there would be other people there and some people that might want to do a bit of cleanup. And when I got there, they had all these booths organized, giving out everyone supplies and snacks. And there was a lot of people that came out to support. And I ended up not filling that much garbage because my community, I'm really lucky. I'm quite privileged in a way to live in a community that's already quite clean. But it was so heartwarming to see the number of people that came out and joined together to just do some good and clean up some of the trash that is around. So that was really heartwarming, and it was a great way to spend a Saturday.
Oh, I love that. I love how you're like beaming as you're recounting this, like smiling at the memory of what you did. John, over to you. Something that's, obviously you have a pretty neat position as the host of this pod, because you could just get to talk to, changemaker after changemaker after changemaker. But what's one that's really jumped out at you?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Ryan. For example, we talked with Ryan Hill a couple of episodes back, a young man from Ontario about the same age as Arian, who is almost professional at his level of singing and dancing and has acted on the big screen with Joaquin Phoenix. So that was pretty cool. To hear the stories of these youngsters who are doing amazing things, it really gives me hope. But moreover, the podcast is not about youth who are, doing absolutely incredible stuff. It's about youth who are just doing basic things to help the environment too. We had a grandmother and her two grandkids who were putting up signs at the end of their driveway. That was their climate action. Each episode features the climate action of the guests. So I get to listen to these stories, school groups from Lacombe and Port Elgin, New Brunswick, who are doing cool stuff around their school. It's not necessarily earth-shattering, but it's small steps that are in the right direction. So that really gives me a huge amount of hope. And it seems to be doing that for our audience as well.
I love it. I love what you're doing. I love the passion that the three of you show, and the fact that you're translating that into action as well. That was John Whidden that you heard from. He's the host and creator of Climate Action Figures, the podcast. We're showing it to you right now on Spotify, but you can find it wherever you get your pods. We've also heard from Arian Sharma, grade 8 student out of Calgary, and Kayla McIntosh, creative consultant on the project. To the three of you, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you got it. Have a wonderful weekend. I don't know if you were watching the live chat, Johnny, but people are like, and I suspected that this might be the case, but when I asked him about politics, when I asked Aaron if he's interested in that, listen to all of this. Like Erica says, this kid is far too classy to be a politician. Sylvia says, why would a bright scientific mind consider the cesspool of politics? And Erica and Sylvia, you're not wrong, but here's the deal. We need more people like that in politics, right? That's what this show's all about. Like, we need like real people that understand real issues, that talk like real humans, that conduct themselves in real ways, that desire real connection, right? You get the theme here, you get the idea. So I think if you can get somebody in politics that's accomplished in something, that they're experienced in something, that there's not this kind of like cynical road to the top. And listen, people that are succeeding in politics right now, like, it's a game, right? I mean, it's like it's a blood sport, but it's like any other career in the sense that you come into it early, you try to get an understanding of how you get in the door, the best way to get in the door. You pick your team, right? You understand sort of like who you think best represents your values and who you think has the best chance of getting elected or forming government or whatever factor goes into it. And then you just chip away and play the game. And you can't fault people, I guess, I get to a certain degree. You can't fault people for playing the game the way that the game is being played and for playing it the best, for playing it to win. They achieve office, they form government, they shape policy. I mean, that's kind of how you do it. But I just like to think that we'll get to a point that everybody collectively will say, we're going to demand better from our politicians. We want people in office that we feel are there for the right reasons, that represent us, and that are pursuing policy for the better good, policy for the greater good, not out of cynicism or nepotism or to protect profits of big donors.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be kind of part of that. I mean, that's just real life. We're not fools. We don't have the wool pulled over our eyes. But I think when I see young people like Aaron, I just go, gosh, like that guy at 35, formidable.
Yes. But I also think, save him, spare his soul from all the craziness that's going on. But I do have some faith that politics is going to get a little less divisive.
Yeah.
I think it's just the age we're in with social media and dropping the bombs and the quick, witty banter. It's just gotten to where I think we're at the peak right now, where it's kind of like, the lies, misinformation, or even in Parliament now, or wherever in the States, in the Senate. It's all about just a quick jab.
It's about owning
quick
each
jab
other.
back,
Yeah.
insults. It's not really about, the pertinent information and things that are going on. Another thing I thought that was awesome John was talking about was like comparatively what he was worried about when he was younger and kids today. Man, it's so much more today. What were we worried about as kids? Like acid rain, the hole in the ozone, which we apparently fixed.
But to be honest,
like it wasn't like fires, flood, raising
I don't know
temperatures and and someone else was saying,
were you actually like as a kid?
No,
like, do you remember like being worried about the hole in the ozone layer? I just remember everybody needed to use less aerosol hairspray. Everybody just needed to chill out on the aerosol.
The SPFs or FPFs or whatever it was. But yeah, we weren't worried about it. It was just on our mind because we were taught about it and we were told about it and we see it every now and then. But like today, somebody else mentioned in the chat, one of the things that's really on my partner's mind and mine too, because she puts it on my mind, is just how if the water's contaminated, if the soil's dry, if the air's polluted, like what are we eating? What are we ingesting from Earth if it's just all polluted? And then you wonder about rising cancer rates, and it all ties back together. And now I'm going down a rabbit hole.
I'd like to change.
You know
my
what
answer.
I mean?
I'm now a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, but today,
after listening to you,
today, compared to worrying about a tennis ball in our eyes when we're a kid, size hole in the ozone or acid rain, it's a lot more today.
But that's also because we weren't like just even listen to you, like just listen to what you're saying. You go. This is becoming a lot about Jatinder. She's going to be texting in being like, would you guys mind like moving off me? But what did you say? You said she sends me and she's keeping you in the know.
Sure.
Woke in a good way, right? She's keeping you aware of the issues. But like when we were young, I didn't have a screen right in front of me showing me devastation from around the world on a 24-hour loop. And I'm not saying this lightly, and I'm not making fun at all. But like we would see the specials on TV of the young kids experiencing famine in Ethiopia, for example, and it would be like, oh my gosh, and then you just think it's like the world, and then it's Ethiopia, right? And then we need to send care packages to Ethiopia, or we need to do a bottle drive.
It seems so far away,
but it's like one thing.
Yeah.
And then now, of course, in the way that algorithms work, like if your algorithm picks up that you're checking out everything about Taylor Swift, your whole algorithm will be Taylor Swift. And now my phone's listening, so now I'm going to get Taylor Swift all afternoon. But if you do start looking at like wildfires, mudslides, plastic in the ocean, then your phone's going to like, it's going to keep feeding you this stuff. So then, of course, the average human is going to start to believe that, look what everybody's posting from all around the world all the time. This is basically front of mind. This is the huge, right? Because it's just being hammered home into your brain all day long. And I'm not saying that we bury our heads in the sand. And I'm also saying that I think perspective is important.
No, but we do need to take breaks from it. Like we need to like, it's hard with us because we talk about it all week.
We do. That's kind of the whole point. And the audience shows up for this stuff, for meaningful conversation on this stuff. What about this from Tracy, who says, we're talking about getting, like what people do we want to draw into politics? And Tracy says, I can think of at least a dozen folks that are subject matter experts that are working as politicians, but they may not be as happy says politics is not often fun. I don't know if politics is ever fun, to be honest. Well, ask politicians. I guess there's some reasons why they may continue to show up. But yeah, you look at people that are like, I don't know off the top of my head, I'm picking a Liberal because it's just the first one that came to mind. But I think of someone like Bill Morneau, who's finance minister, and everybody goes, oh, that's really good to get the Bill Morneau in as finance minister. He's like credible. He's obviously, his family's made just a ton of dough. They understand business. The name means a lot. Morneau Chappelle. That's who the Alberta government went to for the Alberta pension report. But then you realize that after a while, Bill Morneau was like, fuck this. Like, I'm rich. I don't need this. I am out of here. And he just like walked away. Now everybody's thinking like, well, is Mark Carney the solution? Because, former Bank of Canada governor, he gets it. But like, why would he want to go into, who knows? Yeah. And there's examples across the board, obviously for every political party of people that have achieved things outside of politics that come in and then probably find that it's not a fit for them. Like, we've interviewed Mark Garneau on the show before. You look at him, like, once you're an astronaut, when you come back to Earth, it's kind of like, what are you going to do now? Yeah. And I guess cabinet minister is kind of a cool gig, but also like when you were an astronaut, there wasn't a bunch of people calling you like a libtard and like, slinging mud at you on the internet all day, right? Like, so you got to wonder for a guy like Mark Garneau, he doesn't need this.
No.
Why is, I don't know.
But I think of Tyler, too. A.B. Muni's.
Tyler Gandam.
He's kind of...
Mayor of Wetaskiwin.
He's hanging in there, but he says some days he wakes up, too, and is like, fuck this.
Well,
what am I even doing this for?
Yeah, recall petition.
If
trying to get
all I'm trying to do is help communities, and people are just attacking me daily and daily. It's
bit of a different story, too, though, in that situation and in the more local or smaller governments. Because Tyler, he's the mayor of Wetaskiwin. He's the president of Alberta municipalities. He's also a volunteer firefighter, and he's a funeral home
working
director.
His ass off.
Like he's
an
entrepreneur as well. So it's kind of like that's a whole different ballgame where you're like, I'm up 18 hours a day. Why am I doing this?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to take some time today to get to some of the emails that you wrote to us, just because these are incredibly meaningful. And yesterday was a difficult show, and it really, really impacted us how you responded to this. So those emails are coming up in just a quick second. But let me remind you that these shows don't happen without the support of incredible and steadfast partners like our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy, and they are top of the list of who we're going to mention right now after that Climate Action Figures podcast talk. If you want to take action today on decreasing your carbon footprint, on going green, so to speak, why not reach out and get a free quote today at kubienergy.ca. They're Western Canada's busiest solar installer, and there's a reason why community centers and conference centers and farms and office towers and hundreds and hundreds of homes are covered in Kubi's panels. It's because nobody does it better than them, and they're growing their team right now. Check out the careers link. If you'd love to work for Kubi in Calgary, Edmonton, Kamloops, or Lethbridge, that's the careers link at kubienergy.ca. If you go, I'm looking for work, I'm ready for work, but maybe first I need to scale up my credentials, maybe your call. You select your path at Athabasca University. You can read more from alumni like Sheryl online, who says she chose AU for the flexibility because she has a daughter. She wanted to be home for her daughter, so that's where she did her studies. Again, that's athabascau.ca. Complete Care Restoration. Speaking of all these wildfires and these floods, obviously nobody wants to see it happen, but when it does, nobody does a better job of restoring properties and rebuilding peace of mind than the team at Complete Care Restoration. You find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. They're doing work across the province of Alberta right now, have been doing so for more than a quarter century. If disaster strikes and you don't know what to do, call the contractor you can rely on. That's Complete Care Restoration at 780-454-0776. Before we get to these emails, if you missed yesterday's episode, I encourage you to check it out when you do get a second. Maybe it's when you're like walking through the woods, maybe taking the dog out. When you have 45 minutes or so to really reflect, to spend some time in your own thoughts. We talked about grief. It was a very personal show for me, and I appreciate those of you that showed up for it, especially in our live chat. Some of the conversation there was yes, heartbreaking, people talking about loss, but also very encouraging. Jeremy Allen joined us on the show. He's a grief educator, and I knew I needed to have him there to give us tips on how to live after such significant loss. And here's a quick clip from that episode on June 6th. I wanted to be real and vulnerable with this audience. I don't know if I'm back too soon. I don't know if this is me stepping over the line, talking about somebody personally here. I don't want this entire episode to be about my friend, but this episode is in honor and remembrance and reverence of my friend. And I guess ultimately, I hope that by talking about this and by having this difficult conversation, that ultimately someone else's life might be saved or forever changed, that somebody else might better understand this. And yeah, I could use some tools along the way as well, because I don't know which way is up right now.
One of the really unique parts about grief is that it is one of the few environments I've learned, I think the only one that I'm really aware of, that allows for contrasting emotions to be a part of the same experience. That you and this circle of friends and his family and everybody involved is going to be crushed by the emotion of what happens when people we love die by suicide. And we talked about this briefly in email. It's not a fathomable pain because it's imaginable, meaning we can understand it, we can have empathy, we can do our best to try to be more knowing of what life must have looked like for this person, but to experience it is a completely different thing. And when I talk about this, I talk about, I think it's our job to learn and try to better understand and try to imagine what life is like for other people. But that's a different statement than saying, I know what it's like.
So we got a ton of emails to talk at ryanjesperson.com, including this one from Jurgen, who says, I don't have anything profound to say except to offer my condolences. I'm sorry that you lost a friend, but I'm happy you decided to share it with your extended Real Talk family. Hang in there. He says it was a really hard-hitting episode for me. My 19-year-old has been saying the dreaded statement, it'd be so much easier if I wasn't here, and I wish you guys would just let me go. Jurgen says, please keep up these conversations. They are sorely needed. My eyes hurt from tears, but we need to keep talking. He said, thanks. And Jurgen, that means a ton to us. We heard from Cameron, who said, as I write this, I'm listening to your June 6th episode. I'm crying. Says, I had a close friend, David, die by suicide 16 years ago on June 21st. Cameron, I'm sorry. He says, so much of what you said is the same questions and thoughts I've had and sometimes still have. I remember the phone call I got in the late afternoon asking if I could hang out that night. I remember saying it had been a long work day and we were seeing each other and our friends tomorrow night, except for that night never came. For a long time, I thought that, what if I would have just met up with him one day earlier? And I still think about that if I'm being honest, but I could have never known that would be the last time I would speak with him. Fishing in the dark at his funeral. And sometimes it makes it hard to hear on the radio, and it made me cry at my sister's wedding 2 years ago, but it's okay to let those emotions out. Sure as hell is, Cameron. He says, thanks for sharing your grief, your memories of Laws with me, with the Real Talk family. He says, condolences to everybody who's grieving and reminiscing around the life of Laws. Thank you, Cameron. This from Sheryl. Cheryl's subject line, Johnny says, Tim, meet Amber. Caught my attention, Sheryl. She says, your grief aligned with my grief this week in different ways. My grief is old, yours is new. And I think there's no greater grief than new grief. So I'm sorry, Sheryl says, this upcoming June 11th will mark the anniversary of a good friend's passing. Amber died tragically in a tree planting accident when BC rainfall washed away a backroads bridge. That was in 1990, 34 years ago. Your Tim reminds me of my Amber. There are some people who come into this world for what seems to be one purpose, making the lives of every person they touch better. They have this capacity to love and to connect with others that is magical and spiritual and divine. Sheryl, I love this. She says Amber was valedictorian of her high school. She declined multiple offers to escort her to prom, saying yes to the quiet, lonely young man who courageously asked. When I asked her why, she said he was kind and brave and that everybody deserves a prom date. Amber went on to be a brilliant student at the University of Saskatchewan, where her professors, the same ones that drove me crazy, adored her. She was on her way to earning a PhD in English and becoming a teacher. And she would tell each professor how much they inspired her to want to teach, to find ways to make all of her goals and accomplishments all about others. I wonder how many lonely students she would have helped and maybe even saved. She says, Amber and I went out to the YMCA in the early mornings, and after, in the quiet shower room, she would always convince me to belt out, "You are my sunshine." And we would laugh as it echoed off the tiled walls, sometimes serenading a late arrival. And to this day, that song brings a teary smile. And I wonder, says Sheryl, as I still grieve the loss of Amber 34 years later, if these pure souls are lent to this flawed human race for a short time because they are such a rare gift that we only get to enjoy it for a bit so their creator can have them back for their own delight. Whether they are lost to us by accident or on purpose, their souls seem too precious for humanity. Maybe they were always angels walking among us, filling the world with love and light before returning to their rightful place in a more perfect world, a world more deserving of them. We do our best to appreciate them in our own flawed and selfish ways, never quite being enough because we were never worthy of them in the first place. So the universe takes care of them, making it all better. She says, I hope your Tim meets my Amber. I think they'd be kindred spirits. If you hear him in your dreams singing, you are my sunshine, let me know. And Sheryl signs off in shared grief. Whew. I love you guys. It really means a lot. I'm still wondering if I should even be here at work, Johnny. I don't know. But I don't know what I would do with myself if I wasn't. And so I want you guys to know how much these emails mean. Joe wrote in, Johnny says that we're to be commended and hugged with backslaps. So I'm going to give you another hug when we're done this show. But here's why I wanted to read Joe's email, because he says, I'll be following up with all the advice from the show with determination. And I loved that he invoked that word. He's going to follow up from the advice from the show with determination. And I wanted to read this one, and there will be more. We're going to read some of these, like Adler's joining us on Monday. I want to read some of these to him. That's where the mental health conversation started with Chuck. But this one from Johnny, not you. Johnny said, I was so sad to hear about your friend Law as I watched the episode, and I heard you read the comment by Erica. Do you guys remember I read a comment from Erica in the live chat who talked about her husband who had been in law enforcement and had dealt with mental health issues? So Johnny writes in and says, I heard you read the comment by Erica. That's my wife. And he says, and she's not wrong. And he says, so John has appeared with us on an episode of Real Talk in past. I'm going to punch that link to that episode in the show notes so you can watch it. He sat with me here in studio. It's unbelievable. But he says, I spoke with you about my history of work with the RCMP and the coworkers that I lost. What I don't know, if I told you, is that my mental health took its most dire turn in 2010 when I was the first responding officer to a home in Millet, where 2 young children had been murdered by their mom, Allison McConnell. It's a very high-profile story, obviously a huge tragedy. And Johnny says, seeing and touching those 2 precious little angels, their bodies empty and cold and lifeless, broke something critical in me. And I tried and I fought and I struggled so hard to push through, to carry on, to tough it out. And after months of steadily losing ground in this war of attrition against flashbacks and panic attacks and nightmares, I couldn't go on. Johnny says, I wrote love notes and thank you notes and goodbye notes to everybody who mattered to me. And I took my service weapon into the garage and I sat against the wall and I put it in my mouth. And I have no idea what stopped me from pulling the trigger. To this day, I have no idea. I had made up my mind, I had decided to do it, and it was all but done. In the months and years that have followed, I have gained ground and I have lost ground, but the war rages on. Will I take my own life today? No. Will I take my own life someday? Honestly, I don't know. If one day that happens, then people need to know it's not from lack of fighting. It's not about quitting. It is not about giving up. It is that the very weight of living, the pain and despair created by the very thought of another day of life becomes simply too much to bear. I tell you these things not to make it about me, but to share empathy around what your dear friend must have felt. I read up on your pal Laws and his remarkable life while listening to the show, and while I didn't have the honor and privilege of knowing him, I'd like to share something. I would like to confirm something from someone who has walked a very similar path to Laws, and I hope it gives you even the slightest bit of comfort, or maybe a tiny bit of reassurance when you're asking yourself all of those unanswerable questions. And it is this. I can guarantee you, Ryan, I promise you that to his last breath, he never stopped fighting. And I appreciate that so much. And it's so true. You can send emails to the show anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. We're going to keep these conversations going. Not every show is going to be about this, obviously, but this is real life right now. And obviously, we know that we're on to something because the magnitude and the depth and the seriousness and the significance of the messages that you're sending us are telling us that this platform, this show, this community is here for a reason. And so you can be in touch with the show in confidence anytime. I'm ready to blow off a little steam. I don't know about you. This is a pretty great tradition that we have. I'm not going to go there quite yet. The Flamethrower coming up from the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park coming up in just a quick second. Did you notice that note from a Green Tomato in our live chat today? One of the great handles of somebody tuning in that just said they were so impressed by how positive and kind the live chat has been today. Have you noticed that, like, I'm joking, you guys, but the dippers and the right-wingers, you know, all of you guys are mingling together and talking and respecting one another. The conservatives and the liberals that listen to the show are coexisting in peace, if only for a little while, reminding ourselves that at the end of the day, we're all in this together. I absolutely love it, and I want to thank you all for that. You know, a lot of you are going to be gathering around the family table this weekend. Maybe some of you firing up the smoker, the barbecue. Did you know that June is actually Alberta Pork Month? And our friends at Friesen Brothers have you covered. Yeah, that's right. Nobody does it better than the skilled butchers at Friesen Brothers, exclusively offering only fresh Alberta pork, expertly cut in store. To honor and appreciate Alberta pork and its dedicated producers, the team at Friesen Brothers is supporting Pork Month. And that means they're offering loyal customers a chance to win a grill. How about that? With any purchase of fresh Alberta pork through June. This offer is exclusively available to Friesen Brothers loyalty members. They're going to give away a grill at each of the 17 Friesen Brothers stores. There's more information online if you check out Friesen.com. That's Freson.com. Great to hear from our friends at California Closets. Yesterday, I asked Cam, president there, how are things going? He goes, they're like buying new saws and they're expanding their operations because so many people are looking at California Closets for custom closet and storage solutions for the entire home. And I would imagine that also has something to do with their price competitiveness and the fact that they offer a lifetime guarantee. You got nothing to lose talking to their team. You can request a free consultation by visiting them online at californiaclosets.ca. Whether it's the laundry room, a storage room, it could be your guest bedroom doubling as a home office, or even your garage. Nobody does storage systems custom better than the team at California Closets. And talking about action on the environment, emissions in particular, if you're curious to learn more about plans for carbon capture and storage in the province of Alberta, in particular in the oil sands, check out pathwaysalliance.ca. Canada's oil sands on a path to reach net zero emissions from operations, and a big part of that is the 6 biggest producers working with the provincial and federal government on that big project. The plan to answer global energy demand, to offer responsibly produced oil, to protect existing jobs, and to create new ones. If you'd like to learn more about exactly how they're doing it, you can check out the website, pathwaysalliance.ca. I want to give a shout out to Ken for the contribution in the super chat there. Another $5. Jeez, Ken. He says another beer just to say how incredibly professional and strong you guys have been. Johnny says it's getting dusty in here. Ken, we appreciate it. I think Ken's action on this super chat on the YouTube live chat. I think he's already at the stratosphere where he's going to start earning himself invitations, VIP private invitations to Real Talk Happy Hours.
I think definitely, yeah.
You know, I mean, the guy's basically single-handedly stocked the Real Talk beer fridge.
Yeah.
So we appreciate
Paid
that.
for lunch today.
Yeah, he did pay for it. Yeah. Hey, what are we getting? Before we do that, I know what we're having. I'm going to get a signature stack burger.
Oh.
Yeah, maybe from the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Yeah, that would hit the spot. You know, because every single week, our dear friends at the Dairy Queens in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road give us a chance to fire up our flamethrowers. These are your hot takes. These are real emails sent to talk at ryanjesperson.com. How about this one from Debra, who writes in and simply says, I always say earmuffs, kids, but this is not designed to be family friendly. There shouldn't be kids anywhere near this segment, okay? Debra says American women are pissed off. She's a real talker from the States, and we're not going to take it anymore. She says we may not be reflected in some polls that I'm seeing, but we plan to make sure that pussy-grabbing convict gets nowhere near the Oval Office again. Okay, I love that one. How about this one from Ray, who says, Jessica, I was very interested listening to your Real Talk Roundtable this past Friday. So we're talking about the Real Talk Roundtable that was May 31st with Sarah Hamilton, City Councilor, Jenny Adams, a crisis comms expert, and Catherine O'Neill, who's the CEO of the YWCA. And Ray says, number one, the repeating of Trump talking points. One of your guests made a statement that both Trump and Biden have issues, and then she listed 20 issues that Trump has and one issue that Biden has, which is his age. Those are not equal. Look at the communication ability, the physical condition of both. And tell me who exemplifies strong leadership. This is not a situation of the lesser of two evils. And then Pierre Poilievre's popularity. You allowed a quote to go unchecked that Poilievre had thousands and thousands of supporters at rallies in Calgary. Ray, he did. It says, without any proof. I've seen the videos. He says, you stated that Poilievre is growing members without discussion of where they're coming from, and many are severe right-wing fundamentalists who were not actively pursued. And finally, on women's rights, your guests refer to the idea that both parties in Canada need to be monitored on their stance on women's rights. That's not true. He says liberals have protected women's rights without fail. Conservatives, not so much. These are not equal. That from Ray. How about this one from Ed, who says, Jespo, I'm a newer listener from Ontario, and I love Real Talk. Ed, we love our Ontario audience. He says, to me, it's like a more balanced look at politics. And he says, so I really want to thank you for your content. But regarding your group chat roundtable, where you talked about people's fear about a conservative plan to get rid of access to abortion and women's rights, all I can think about is, while it is true that Pierre Poilievre's on the record saying he is unequivocally supportive of a woman's right to choose, does that even matter if health policy is determined by our provinces? Maybe I'm not seeing where the Charter of Rights and Freedoms will intervene, but if health policy comes from the premiers, could Pierre Poilievre say one thing and they could do another? I'm just asking the question because I'm concerned for all the women in my life and their autonomy. That from Ed. Ed, it's a good point. But I feel like it'd be political suicide for any premier to go there, but we will wait and see, and if anything happens, you bet your ass we'll be talking about it here on Real Talk. How about this one from Jim in Vernon, BC, who says, Jespo, your morning panel, when you guys were talking about the use of phones in schools, that's May 31st as well, coming up again on June 11th, a custom special edition of Real Talk on phones in schools. He says, comments about attention and socialization. There's studies indicating the negative effects of phones in use by, in particular, affecting the GPA or the grades of female students for the worse. As a retired teacher, says Jim, I remember when phones were first introduced into classrooms. Looking back at the pattern, the social problems, especially with girls, increased as the use of phones increased. Certainly there's got to be a place for information and communication within schools, but it should be monitored carefully and under the control of the teacher. And one other thing, Jespo, while talking about connecting, one of your guests on that roundtable mentioned how Donald Trump had connected with so many people. I wonder which direction that connection flows. When one end of it is a supposed billionaire and a narcissistic, racist, misogynist liar, Trump could care less about the people who fawn over him all the time. And as for Pierre Poilievre, I don't know. I haven't been following his follies, but I consider all politicians to have them. That from Jim and Vernon. And finally, this one from Jennifer, who writes in commenting on my conversation with Andrew Lawton, the autobiography of Pierre Poilievre. You can check that out last week. Talked to Andrew, I think it was on May 30th. Jennifer says, I am a physician. Poilievre is on the spectrum. No joke, and I do not mean it as an insult, but that's why he reacts the way he does. It's why he's rigid, it's why he hyperfixates on things, and it's why he truly can't understand why people think he's a douchebag. He's not really prime ministerial, he's not polite enough, and I don't see any empathy. That from Dr. Jennifer. You can send us your hot take, fire up your flamethrower 24/7 to talk at ryanjesperson.com. Proudly presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Coming up next week on the show, we got Charles Adler with us on Monday, a special edition episode on phones in schools on Tuesday, plus a huge announcement, huge announcement.
Enormous.
An enormous announcement, like on the category of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in studio type announcement.
One of the biggest ever.
One of the biggest ever announcements in the history of Real Talk. You better believe it, coming up next week. In the meantime, smash the like button, subscribe to our YouTube, and tell your friends about Real Talk. Have a great weekend.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive